Okay, so to get us started, I just want to introduce our speaker. Gail Reynolds is our state coordinator for Yukon Master Composter Program and Middlesex County coordinator for the Yukon Master Gardener Program and the Yukon Biological Controls Projects field researcher. Retired from a long career as an information security professional. She holds a BS in biology from Yale College, a master's of forest science degree from Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and serves on the boards of the Connecticut Botanical Society, the Yale Science and Engineering Association, the Lower Connecticut River Land Trust, the Haddam Land Trust, the Salmon River Watershed Committee, the Haddam Sustainability Committee, and the chairs of the Haddam Conservation Commission. In addition, she is co-owner of Reynolds Forestry Services. So Gail, I will let you take over and I'm going to mute myself and we'll be back after.
Yeah, thank you very much. Oops. Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening. Sorry about that. I had to get my microphone right. As Tammy said, this has been a crazy weather day. I know here in Haddam, we had wild thunderstorms and hail and all that. I'm sure you had something similar, although probably a little earlier in the afternoon. But let's settle down and talk about some home composting. And composting is a lot of different things. And what the agenda here is just talking a little bit about what composting is. Then I'll just go through composting methods. And there's no method better than the other. Sometimes it's even good to just do a combination. So what is composting? It's controlled decomposition. So it's not anything magical really, because things decompose all the time, generally by microbes, and you need air and water. But with composting, we're controlling it. We're essentially speeding it up. And you can use the resulting organic material. You can use it for soil nutrients. You can use it to improve soil structure, especially if you have a very a soil that has a lot of clay in it, that doesn't have a lot of pores, and water doesn't filtrate that well. If you break it up and put compost in it, you should be able to get more water through the soil. Or if you have a very sandy soil, you can add compost and the water will be retained a little bit. It won't just drain right through. And you can even use compost as mulch. So composting is a series of biochemical reactions. You have larger compounds and they keep being broken down into smaller and smaller molecules. So the organic form of nitrogen, you have to break it down into inorganic, which is the ammonium ion or nitrate. Is that nitrate or nitrite? I don't remember that, NO3. And that's how the plants can use it. Because the organic form, it's nitrogen, but the plant roots can't use it in that form. And you have macro and microorganisms performing this transformation. So really, it boils down to chemistry, a lot of organic chemistry. And you mostly microorganisms, you have bacteria, fungi, but you have some larger things. You have worms and roly-polies and centipedes in there, and we'll talk about them a little more. But it's really speeding up the chemistry of this organic material. So benefits of composting, of compost. You can add your organic nutrients to the soil and they do become available to the plant roots, and it's over time. It's not like a big bang and then it goes away. It's there as the plant roots need them. As I mentioned before, it can improve soil structure. water holding capabilities, air holding capabilities when used to amend the soil, and makes plants more able to resist disease. This is not a blanket statement. There have been studies that show when specific plants are subject to like compost tea made with specific ingredients, that they are more able to resist specific diseases, especially fungal diseases. And I didn't cite which studies here, but it's not a blanket thing. But because it does occur for a few different combinations, it's worth mentioning. And again, it decreases your waste going to the landfill or the waste stream. And you can use it as mulch. So what you need for carbon is you need carbon containing, for composting rather, you need carbon containing material, you need nitrogen containing material, you need the macro and microorganisms that decompose these substances, you need air, you need moisture, you need warm temperatures. Composting will not happen when it's really cold, and you need a venue, someplace to do this, whether it's your backyard, whether it's a cabinet under your sink, whether it's a shared composting facility at a community garden, or whether it's an industrial composting site. So the sources of carbon and nitrogen. Dry brown matter is normally high in carbon, and these in the composting lingo we call the browns. So you have things like sawdust, fallen leaves, wood chips. And then the fresh green material like your kitchen scraps, those are high in nitrogen. So it would include grass clippings, your vegetative kitchen waste, and then manures. And here are some estimated ratios, and the ratio is important, but you can see the carbon to nitrogen ratio of wood chips is really high, 400 carbon to 1 nitrogen. That is really high in carbon. Leaves, 60 to 1, shredded newspaper, 175 to 1, and then sawdust is again pretty high, 325 to 1. The greens, which are the high in nitrogen, your vegetable scraps, 25 to 1 with carbon. Grass clippings, 20 to 1. Garden waste, 30 to 1. And that would be clippings from your plants, whether it's from your vegetable garden or from, say, a perennial garden. And then manures, and this is an average because different manures have different ratios. So, we have that background. So what are the methods of composting? There's cold composting that's also called moldering. There's hot composting, thermophilic, meaning loves hot. You have aerobic, where you have a lot of air involved. And then you have anaerobic, where you don't have much air. And that's when you get the awful smells. And then you have vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. So here are some materials not to compost. You don't compost meat, fish, dairy products, bones, pet food or waste, and also things with oils. So like if you have like salad scraps, but they have like oily salad dressing on them, don't compost those. And the items here that I have listed on this slide, these have the potential to bring in your vermin, your animals, and pet waste can contain diseases and parasites. And you don't want any human waste in there either. So moldering it's also like the phrase that describes it is benign neglect. And how this is really used is a lot of people who use this method will just set something up in the fall and then leave it over the winter. And when they're ready for compost, like when things, in the spring as things heat up, they will have some compost. Um, and there's the lasagna method where you layer. You start with newspaper or cardboard on the bottom, and then you have your green, a layer of greens, which is your nitrogen, topped by a layer of browns or carbon, and you continue till you're about a foot tall, and you stop with a brown layer on top. You can That's one method. You can just bury organic material a foot deep in the soil, and then you can trench, this is often used if you have a garden and you have rows. You can do trenches between your garden rows, and you pack it with with leaves, straw, chopped garden debris up to the surface level, and that'll turn to compost. You don't want to use hay though, because hay has a lot of seeds, and the compost is available in the spring. But because this is cold composting, your weed seeds and any pathogens will survive. So it's easier, it doesn't take much labor, but you will have to pay attention for seeds and some fungal spores and things. And the seeds, if you don't mind garden volunteers, you'll probably get extra tomato plants if have put tomato debris or leaves or old tomatoes in there, that sort of thing. But you can also have invasive seeds. They tend to last a long time. So, there's a trade-off. It's up to you. Now, the aerobic thermophilic method, you want to do an initial carbon to nitrogen ratio of 25 or 30 to 1. That's ideal. There are compost calculators that help you fine tune the ratio. And there are some that are online, some are an app that you can download, and some are spreadsheets that you can use either online or download. And I've listed some links here. Some are from Washington State or from Cornell. Those are both extension universities in Washington and New York State, respectively. And you say what materials you're going to compost, and you type that in, and it'll give you like how much you need of each. And it's important to have, if you don't have appropriate ratios, your composting might not, it might take longer, or it might not be as complete. So bacteria, other microorganisms, especially your fungi and your molds, which are kind of fungi, are naturally occurring in organic matter, and they break down the carbon and the nitrogen into the inorganic forms that plants can use. So if you're starting to compost and you're not sure if you have microbes in your pile, you can add a shovelful of soil, or you can add some finished compost. So structures, you don't need to get fancy here. You can just make a pile. And this is really good if you have leaves, instead of bagging them, if you just rake them into a pile and leave them there, they will, like say over the winter, will turn into leaf mold, which makes great compost. Where I live, you can sort of do whatever you want. I know down towards Fairfield County, because we lived in Norwalk before we moved up here. Things are, you can't it's not as rural, so you can't do a lot of things that you can do here. But you can use bins. You know, you can buy a fancy bin like this that you can turn, or you can make your own bin, something like where my cursor is now, just some boards and some chicken wire. You can do that. You can use garbage cans and just drill some holes in them so you know, you get your air in. You can make a pit. Again, that'll tend more to moldering than the hot composting, but you can do that. Or you can use bags. And if you just like take a garbage bag or something, that will be anaerobic. So you will get some compost, but you'll probably have an odor with that. And I know a lot of people who start composting and then for whatever reason give it up tend to sell these fancy composters at tag sales. So if you're in the market to get a composter like the one where my cursor is, the one that you can turn, you know, you might want to check the local tag sales. I don't know if we'll be having many tag sales during the pandemic time, but you know, it has to end sometime. So that's where you can get good deals on composters, but you can always order them online. So it's important to shred or chop up your organic materials, because that will really speed up the composting process, the decomposition, because you increase the surface area so the microbes can access it a little bit more quickly. And you need to turn the pile every few days. You know, you can use a shovel or you can get a pitchfork, and you want to allow air and water to make sure that those get to every part of the pile. You want to keep the compost moist. So if there isn't sufficient rain or dew, then you might want to just hose it down if it gets really hot. And also there are compost thermometers that you can get. They have a really long stem. You want to put it in the center of the pile. And you want the center of the pile to reach 104 degrees Fahrenheit for at least 5 days, consecutive days, because that will kill the pathogens in the seeds. But you don't want it to get too hot, because if it consistently goes over 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the microbes will be killed, and you don't want that to happen, because they're a very they're a big part of what happens. You know, the way I do it here, my husband and I do it pretty informally, and ours doesn't get that hot, and we tend to have weed seeds. Also, if you put bigger pieces, like if you put pine cones or spruce cones in, those are going to take a lot longer, excuse me, to decompose. So those you can buy, if you have a sieve, or you can just you know, get some boards and put some smaller chicken wire on there, so you can sieve that big stuff out and recompost it until it decomposes. And here's you know, harvesting it. This is a photo from the University of Vermont, and this is the kind of composter where it has an opening down at the bottom and you can just shovel it out like that. So here's some troubleshooting. If you have an unpleasant odor, you know, it means that you don't have enough of something. Usually it's air, it could be water, or it could be that your carbon and nitrogen balance is not, it's not a good balance. So if you have a very ammonia odor, you want to add carbon, because that means you have too much nitrogen. If you have that rotten egg odor, the hydrogen sulfide, you want to add nitrogen for that. And you want to ensure proper drainage and proper aeration. If the decomposition is slow, you know, it could be the temperature. If it's warmer, you should be able to, you know, make a compost, you know, set your pile up, leave it alone, and it should, you know, just turn it, you know, don't add anymore, but just leave it. And the compost should form within 4 to 6 weeks. You know, if you're going to be like we tend to be, my husband and I, where we just tend to always dump things and not just let it cure. It doesn't work that fast. What a lot of people do is have 3 bins, where they have 1 bin and they'll set it up and just let that uh, decomposition occur, and then they'll start setting up other ones as the time goes by. So you have to address any odors, ensure that you have the right moisture and air. And if the pile tends to be compacted, meaning you haven't been turning it, you need to turn it, because that's important. That helps move the moisture and the air around as well. So if you have insect, disease, and weed pests in there, if they survive the composting process, it means you're not getting hot enough. It also means that you shouldn't compost weeds or invasive plants. And again, what a weed is, a weed is just a plant that is growing someplace that you don't want it to. So your weed might be my treasure. But if you don't want certain plants, and if you don't want invasive plants in your compost, don't compost them. Like, don't compost garlic mustard. Don't compost agapodium or bishop's weed or gout weed. Those are invasive plants. They're called invasive for a reason. They're really hard to get rid of, so don't compost them. And I don't recommend composting infective vegetative material. If your tomatoes have some kind of leaf blight, burn them or put them in the garbage to go get burned. Don't compost them. And then if you have mammal pests, like, you can have rodents, you can have deer coming to, chow down at, dogs, bears, raccoons. 2 years ago, we had a possum in our compost pile. You can put a lid on your compost pile. You can put a lid of some kind. You can use smaller aeration holes, although, a mouse or a small mammal doesn't take much space to get in. And you can, on the bottom, to keep animals from tunneling in on the bottom, you can put down hardware cloth on the bottom or on the sides, and that will prevent voles and things from coming up, mice. And if you put fresh food scraps in, make sure that you bury them under the browns, the carbon, because that will, they won't be as accessible. So this is anaerobic, meaning you're not having much oxygen. This is a closed system, like a digester, little oxygen, and fermentation is one of the processes that happens. And this is usually an industrial scale, and it's not really for backyards. And this is where a lot of, some farms have this, where they take all the cow manure or whatever manure they have, and they have a digester that breaks it down, and then they get a compostable material. And if you know the cow pots, they're made by Freund's Farm, that's up in northwest Connecticut. They use a digester for their cow manure because they are a dairy farm, and they use the result of the digestion to make the cow pots. And this again can be a source of very bad odors. If they don't scrub the odors out, your methane and your hydrogen sulfide, or your rotten eggs. Okay, so composting using worms. This is another method. And if you don't have a yard, or you just, don't have a lot of food scraps, this is a way that you can compost indoors. So what you need your worms, you need a container, you need your bedding materials for your container, and that's like shredded newspaper or something. You need moisture, you need your water, you need your air, your ventilation, you need your warm temperatures, you need the appropriate pH, and then you need some food for the worms. And here's the good, the bad, and the ugly about worms. Worms make very low maintenance pets. I didn't mean to say pests, I meant pets. You can compost indoors during cold weather. You don't need a yard. It's very low cost. You can, with composting with worms, when you put water in it to keep it moist, you put a container underneath, and the water that comes out, you can use that as compost tea. You can put that on your house plants. That works great. Okay, the bad, composting worms are exotic species. In fact, in Connecticut, all earthworms are exotic species. Connecticut and New England and all the areas that were glaciated, worms were wiped out. And we have the worms here, the sources of them are mostly, there are some European worms that European colonists brought with them, like, like night crawlers and those. But there also are Asian worms. And if you've ever heard of crazy worms or snake worms or jumping worms, and these are becoming quite an issue because they do, they're not a good match for our either forest floor or even our lawns, because they consume things quickly and in large quantities, and you're left with nothing. And then you have swindlers who will sell you anything, and they're inappropriate worms. And here I mention again the crazy snake worms. Most of them are Amynthus species, and you can tell these worms, the snake worms, the Asian worms, because their clitellum, which is their reproductive organ, it is closer to their head, and it is complete around their entire body. The European worms, the clitellum is farther down in their midsection, and it doesn't extend all the way around their body. There's not really much you can do about the snake worms, but they're, it's become so bad that people are now researching it, and it's actually being funded, because for a long time nobody wanted to fund research into exotic and invasive worms. So here are the best composting worms. Icenia fetida, Icenia andreae, and then Lumbricus rubellus. These aren't native, but they're not invasive. Okay, they will not overwinter outdoors in New England. So if you put them outdoors, they will not survive the winter. The Asian worms will not survive the winters either, but their cocoons will. They lay their eggs in a cocoon. And if you know what you're looking for, you can see these in dirt. Okay, the composting worms are often sold as fishing bait. If you buy these worms, buy from reputable sellers and use the Latin name. Use one of these names here. Don't use a common name, because then you never know what you're going to get. And the hybrid claims of cross variety superworms are marketing scams. So you can buy a specialized worm bin. You can have a wooden bin. I find what works really well is just going to the store and getting like a Rubbermaid bin or something, and then, put something underneath. You can get a foil baking dish, or one of those big foil, like a turkey baker. And then you need a drill to drill holes around it. And 2 feet by 2 feet by 8 feet. That's ideal for a pound of worms. You can go much smaller than that though. So your bedding materials. Shredded newspaper is great. The current soy-based inks are fine. They're not toxic, but you don't want to use any glossy paper. You can use coconut coir fiber. You can use leaves that are chopped up, put in a few handfuls of soil. Okay, shredded cardboard, but don't shred the wax kind. You can use peat moss, but it um, it's very acidic and it holds a lot of water. And when you think about it, peat moss is produced by mining bogs, and bogs are really precious landforms. And I don't recommend destroying bogs to use peat moss for your worm bin. So you need warm temperatures. The ideal temperature is here right below like 60 through 70, because I know the first time I tried to do this, I put my worms in the basement, and I have a really old house with a stone foundation, and it's really cold, and the worms did not survive. But if it gets too hot, then you'll find the worms trying to escape. You'll actually see them crawling up the sides of the container and trying to leave. And when it's above 95, then it's they can't survive. And again, you want a pH of like, in the neutral, the higher acidic to lower alkaline. And if the pH is not off, then you might see them trying to escape. So here's, what you can give them: fruits, vegetables, cereal, oatmeal, cornmeal, crushed eggshells, coffee grounds and filters, loose tea in tea bags, shredded newspapers, but no animal bones, no animal bits, no butter, salad dressing, mayonnaise, no glossy paper, no greasy food, no oil, no dairy, and no pet waste. So there's commonality between what you can and can't compost, from the outdoor systems and with the worms. So what you want to do is you have to, you have your container, you drill the holes in it, you put your bedding in, your newspaper or whatever, you moisten it. So like you can like drip water through it, or you can just, spray water on it. So then, you bury the worms, and then you bury the food too. They like to be under the bedding, and they actually eat the bedding. So you have to refill it every once in a while. So the food might need to be softened for the worms to consume it. So it could be moisture and microbes. So the worms love cantaloupe rinds or any kind of melon rind. However, if it's not soft enough, it might become all moldy, but that's fine. You shouldn't be shocked if you open your worm bin and see mold, because they're just helping. So you can see like your bacteria, you can't see. You can see mold and fungi. Again, perfectly normal. You can also see like mites, springtails, roly-polies, and other kinds of worms called potworms. Okay, so how do you harvest this? These are the 3 methods: dump and sort. You let the worms self-sort, and then you can just alternate containers. And worms move to the food, so you can push the worms in the bedding to 1/2, and then fill an empty side with fresh bedding and new food, and the worms will migrate. And then you can just harvest the old side. And you can alternate containers. Do one, dump the old one directly into the garden, and then you can hand pick the worms. And I tend to do this. It's not very efficient, but you can do it. And then you can have the worms self-sort. You can put down like plastic, cover it with newspaper, and the worms don't like light, so they will move towards the shade. And as they do that, you can just harvest the casings, because really the compost here is the worm poop or the worm casings, but it makes great compost. So if you're troubleshooting this unpleasant odor, you put in too much food, then, more food than your worms can keep up with it. You don't have enough air, or it's too moist. So you just have to rectify those. If you have too many acidic foods like citrus or coffee grounds, cut back on those. Add a little lime or some ground up or crunched eggshells. Okay, if you get fruit flies or if you get drain flies, the food is exposed. So then you need to put more bedding, there. You could cover the surface of the bin with a plastic sheet or something to keep the flies from getting in, or you can make traps for these flies using some apple cider vinegar with a few drops of Dawn or some other dish detergent, and put them. I use a canning jar with a few holes in the top, and they'll go in there and then they can't get out. Or if uneaten smelly food, again, you might put too much food in. And again, if you do this, you'll just get a feel for how much your worms need. So, and in summary, there's no one way to compost. You have this little under-counter worm bin, your homemade outdoor bin, which is very loosely layered. You can just put some leaves in a bucket and make some leaf mold. Or you can have industrial scale composting. So I, urge you and encourage you to come on and compost. And that's what I have for presentation. So now we can